So let's start off with the most important question. Would you mind sharing your story and how you came to your faith in Christ?
I'll share, but I'll tell you that story would take a lot longer than we have. I've been blessed in a lot of ways for my entire life. And there comes a point where, for me, there was a point where I took that for granted. I thought that the talents that I had were talents that I developed on my own. I felt like I was able to do and accomplish things that maybe others couldn't, but that I was doing it alone. And if you fast forward to about 7 years ago, things in my life were good on a professional side. But on the personal side, I felt empty, didn't feel fulfilled, was not the man I wanted to be for my family, for my wife and children. And during that realization, I spent some time with a pastor and my father-in-law, Ken Houts, who had been sort of pushing me a little bit and said, he's retired, but he said, I'd like to do Bible studies with you. And the word Bible meant something to me, but the study part did not. And eventually I gave in because I had this emptiness, figured I couldn't figure out how to fulfill that. But every time I was around Ken, I felt a certain love and caring from him that was different than what I had experienced in my past with others. So as we began the teachings, eventually the Bible, the Word, resonated with me. I started to realize that, all the way back to as far as I could remember, that these blessings that I had, and I didn't know they were blessings at the time, I thought they were just talents, were given to me by God for a reason. And so as we've studied over the years, I've become, I think, a better man as I've followed the teachings of Jesus, because I was willing to hear what Ken told me, but also willing to feel and hear what the Bible was telling me. Once you start to realize that, then the journey is a little bit different. So, I look back on things like, there's a 16-year-old Ed, and he's the starting quarterback on a football team. He's the fastest kid in the United States in the 100 meters. And I thought, those were all, I was just, young man, those were God-given talents. And so what were those talents given to me for? And that's what the Bible's taught me. And as I jump forward into my life, every time I feel anxious, everyone does, scared, afraid, don't have answers, I find that the Bible has all of those answers for us and that I can cast my anxieties and fears where they need to be with God. So, while I'm not necessarily telling you the story, in terms of how I came there, I can tell you that God has been with me for a very long time, and he's been sending me signs that he's been with me. It's the ability to see that has changed in the last 6 years. And once you see it, then you see it everywhere. Even in things that you think are, we go through our trials and tribulations, even during those difficult times, I can now see that the Lord is at work. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of where it started, was just working with Ken House. And then from that point on, I'm doing some new things that I don't know if I've shared with you, but, looking to get a new degree in ministry. Kansas Christian College, I'm all signed up and getting ready to go online.
Wow,
so
good for you.
I'll be spending my evenings doing that. So I don't think the journey ever ends, but now I'm, focused on understanding what God has done for me and making sure I give thanks in the right place.
Didn't you say you were driving by? Driving by randomly, and all of a sudden you're thinking about, hey, maybe I need to go in there. Yeah,
so a story, I bounce around from imaging center to imaging center for work, and I'm going down Metcalf, heading to my Plaza location, and I'm listening to the Christian station on satellite radio. I can't remember what it's called, but I do that a lot. And I'm stuck in traffic at an unusual spot, and I'm thinking, I'm feeling the urge, the desire in my heart to get closer to Jesus. And that is something that's almost like a hunger I have to feed at this point. And I look up, and it's roughly 75th and Metcalf area, and there's a Kansas Christian College sign sitting right next to me. And I felt like that was God speaking to me. God speaks to us in different ways. If you jump back a long time ago in my life, that's just a sign to me. Today, it's a different kind of sign. And so I got back to my office and Googled them, sent an email, and probably 2-3 months later, I'm now enrolled and getting ready to start doing something that's way outside of my normal background and training, but that I think will help me get closer to Jesus. Along those lines is a planned trip to Israel soon, so I can retrace Jesus' steps myself. Wow. So, my whole life now is revolving or centered around the Lord. Now, I'm still a sinful man who worships cars and strange things. But,
guilty.
But, everything I do is I first look at, how would Jesus do this? What would God want me to do? And then I react. Mm-hmm. So, that it's been an interesting journey, but it's a journey that I feel like I'll continue on now for the rest of my life. So I think I'll be if God chooses to let me live this long, I'll be an 80-year-old man still studying Jesus' teachings.
Were you raised Christian?
No, my mother is Portuguese. Was born in Portugal. She went to Catholic schools and was raised Catholic. My father was in the military, Air Force, and they met in Germany. And Mom, after having gone through the Catholic schools, was sort of anti-church. It bruises and creates a lot of rules and things that make it very difficult for young people when they're young. Mm-hmm. And I think that by the time she had my brother and my brother is 5 years younger than me, she was sort of done with the church and felt like her children could figure it out on their own. So we didn't have any. My dad had a Bible, I do remember that, on a bookshelf, but we didn't have any spiritual upbringing at all, which is why it was difficult for me to realize early on that God was with me and God was giving me talents and things that perhaps I didn't realize He was giving me.
So if your father had a Bible, he just never told you about it?
Well,
or talked to you about it?
So my relationship with my father is a difficult one. It was good, bad, and everything in between. He tended to use the Bible in a way that I would not recommend people do. If he thought my brother or I had done something wrong and he wanted us to tell the truth, he'd say, "Oh, I'm going to make you put your hand on the Bible and talk about this." But because we didn't have the background, I'm not sure that meant what it should have. So all it did for me was create a fear of it. So I had this inherent fear of what is in this Bible, and if I put my hands on it and I have a bad thought, I might die tomorrow, kind of thing. I mean, I honestly thought those kinds of things were there. And so it was used as a punishment as opposed to a teaching tool, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So, and you add that together with the fact that my mother was not really someone who wanted to be around the church, and we just didn't have that spiritual upbringing.
It's almost like most people are a little afraid of the Bible.
Well, I think they should be to a certain degree. Mm-hmm. I don't think you should, carry it in your hand up a set of stairs and have sinful thoughts and anger in your heart. But it is a tool that is teaching, to me, if you want to take away just one little thing from the Bible, is that God loves you no matter what you've done, what you think. And you should not fear Him for that reason, just because you've committed sin. And that's what my dad was teaching. Actually, if you think about a child, where were you, and he doesn't believe us, and you put your hand on the Bible and talk about it, then it's used as a tool to reprimand you. So it's like God is angry with you, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But that's not what the Bible says. So that was my upbringing in terms of church. My mom her dad died when she was young, and her stepdad did go to church and would invite, but my mother discouraged us from going. So I bet you I went to church once or twice the entire time, all the way up till my mid-20s.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then you said up to your mid-20s. What then changed for you to then revisit going to church again?
Well, the funny story is selfishness did. I was dating a young lady.
I knew you were going to say that.
Dating a young lady. And she invited me to church. And I thought, if I don't go to church, I don't have a chance with this young lady.
What would we do without women? Oh, my goodness. We would all be running around Just not following God's will.
Probably not. I have 4 more cars and I'd be an unhappy guy, you know. But
we're lost. We're just completely lost.
Yeah. We owe a lot to our women and the fact that God saw fit to give us women. But yeah, so that's why I went again, and then you have to jump forward a lot of years before I started really trying to get back and understand, the Bible. I don't think I read the Bible all the way through until I was, I'm old now, but I probably only read the Bible through for the first time when I was like maybe 34, 35.
So when you're reading the Bible, or even attending church when you're younger, compare that to now. Do you feel like there's a big difference?
Oh yeah, it doesn't even compare. Before I was reading it. Today I'm learning it. Mm-hmm. I can go give all kinds of other analogies, but you can read a technical manual for anything, right? You say, okay, well, we can learn how this car is put together. You read it, but now I'm reading it. I can process what it means. I can get some practical application to what it tells me. I use it. There's a book that my father-in-law gave me that is Bible verses, but it's titled on the front, "What to Do." And so you'll go in and you open up the table of contents, and it'll say, when you're anxious or feeling scared, these are the places you go in the Bible, and so it'll speak to that. When you do not know whether you want to turn left or right, where do you go? And this speaks to that. And so, I use the Bible as almost as a consultative tool. What do I do next?
That's awesome. So tell me about what is Diagnostic Imaging Centers about?
We're an organization that's been around a little more than 56 years. Basically what we do is we provide imaging services, so medical imaging, X-ray, CT, MR, the things that I should stop speaking in acronyms, CAT scans, MRIs, those kinds of things, to people who need them. It was born out of a need to take the imaging out of the hospital setting and do it on an outpatient basis where it's less expensive and more convenient for people. Now, there's a place for the inpatient side, obviously. You get a car accident, you're going to need those things. But our goal over 50 years ago was to find a way to get people access to these things without having to be inside of an expensive hospital facility. And so it's grown over the years. That model is now the model that's used across the entire world, not just in the country. I think we do a pretty nice job of trying to provide a service at a high quality service at a low cost, and something that's convenient. So you can walk in and out and spend less than an hour with us and get all your testing done. And generally speaking, we get the results back a lot faster than hospitals do too. So we'll get the results to your doctor. How fast your doctor calls you is another story. But by the time you walk out of our clinic, most of the time, your images have been looked at by a doctor, and the process to send the results to the doctor that ordered the exam is already happening.
That's great. So how many facilities, how many locations do you guys have?
We've got 9 locations and a mobile mammography coach that travels around to underserved areas and does cancer screenings for mammograms. We've got almost 300 employees in total. 10 years or so ago when I started, we were less than half that, and we're at 4 locations. So our growth has been pretty interesting, difficult at times, but all positive.
So from when you started 10 years ago, there were 4 locations.
Correct.
How many employees?
About 120.
So it went from 4 locations, 120 employees, to 9 locations and 300 employees.
That's right.
What caused that?
It's super simple. So for everybody listening, you can steal our idea here. You have to focus on who you are, and then you have to focus on telling people what you do and where you are. And from there, we looked and said, hey, what areas are we not serving? If you're going to be about quality and convenience, then in order to provide that convenience piece of it, you have to have enough locations to serve the community you're in. So we looked at where we were weak, where people were underserved in terms of being able to do imaging on an outpatient basis, and did some acquisitions along those lines so that we could provide the service in those areas. So now if you take and draw a circle around what we call Kansas City out here. And for people that are not from Kansas City, it's hard to understand, but we sit on that state line.
Yep.
So if you draw a big circle around the state line that covers about 100-mile radius, we service everything in that 100-mile radius and can get you exams. It helps to be able to serve that radius from a health plan perspective too. So if you have health insurance, Blue Cross, Humana, those various carriers, you need someone that accepts those plans. So we had to go around and talk to the health plans as well and say, where do you need these services as well? So you mix those two things together, and we created what we have today. There's still a couple areas I feel where we can, we could be out, a little bit further out in Belton, that Raymore, Peculiar, that kind of area. Mm-hmm. So there's things like that I look at continually. But when the time and the economics works, then we'll move into those areas as well.
So you said quality and convenience.
Yeah.
But it seems that it's more convenience that you guys really focus on the most.
I think so. It's hard to say that you don't focus on quality. So I'll just say that convenience is what Americans focus on right now.
Right.
Yeah, we want. That's why Amazon works so well for everyone. You press a button and a pair of socks can show up the next, maybe even the same day. Right. So that's what America's all about. The problem with the healthcare system is that it's not convenient, generally speaking. Mm-hmm. If you want to schedule an appointment for almost anything, if it takes you in and out of one of these big hospital systems, you might as well spend several days trying to get it scheduled, plan on a whole day of getting in and out, plan on hours afterwards, tracking down things, scheduling your next appointment, that kind of thing. So, we try to make it pretty simple. You can schedule with us. Most exams are online. Yep. So you can get online, schedule your exam, pick your time. We'll call you and walk through your preps. You can call us directly. There's no automated system that sends you to talk to, you get to talk to a live person that happens to be in Kansas City, that doesn't have any language barriers. We do have Spanish speakers if needed. So we try to do everything we can. Our entire process is centered around what an individual might need to get imaging. And it is also all we do is imaging. So you don't have to be an expert in all things like you do if you're a hospital. A hospital has to have orthopedics and cardiology and all those various things to keep their ER open and their surgery centers open. So it lets us be much, much more efficient. And if we can be more efficient, then we can create the convenience that we're looking for. And, quality is there too, because we're an expert. We are imaging experts. So that in itself lets us focus only on one quality metric, is how do we improve what we do on the imaging side. Hospitals, I've managed the hospitals, and again, I'm not saying anything negative about them because they must exist. We rely on them, if you think about that. But, from a quality standpoint, we can be much better if we are just the manufacturer of imaging services as opposed to everything else that we just talked about.
I mean, you guys can just get laser focused on doing your CAT scans and doing the MRIs.
Right.
Just that.
All the other.
I think a lot of companies will try to go too wide with the amount of things they're trying to quote unquote specialize in, but then it starts to become watered down, and ultimately the resources are spread out, whether it be capital or even just mental resources from your labor, where now you can't just be amazing at that one thing or even a couple of things.
Right. Now, it's okay to expand services. I think that, someday what I see, if you project out the next 10 years, I can see us, delving into other things that tie to imaging in some way. Mm-hmm. But, you make sure you're good at your core business before you start doing those kinds of things. And we've got 50 years of practice. So I think we're at the position where we might be able to do some of those things. I personally am not in the position to push us there yet. There's still some uncertainty. Healthcare is under attack by the government. I don't want to get into all those things here. But, as reimbursement decreases, we still have to use the same equipment, same staff. Costs are increasing.
Right.
So I have to be careful where I point the ship next. But so for now, we'll focus on our core business. But over time, I think I could see us expanding that.
So when you're opening an additional location and you're drawing the radius around that location of what the furthest that you think somebody's going to drive to reach that location, how much overlap do you have between your locations, right? So if you have a circle around one, the other ones, do you have them just perfectly touching, or do you have overlap? And if it's overlap, how much?
There's some overlap. There almost has to be for scheduling issues. Mm-hmm. Usually a 5-10 mile radius is sort of what I look at. Kansas City is different. So if you have an imaging center on one side of the state line versus the other. There are people who don't want to cross the state lines.
Those are invisible boundaries, aren't they?
They are, and you've got people who don't like to cross the river. So if you've got one north of the river, getting people to come south of the river can be extremely difficult.
It's so funny because, we're not living in the times where bridges don't exist.
Right.
But yet we won't go over the river.
That's that convenience.
And over here, we don't go south of 135th. That's our river.
You're exactly right. And that's why we have, imaging centers in Olathe and in Overland Park. I wouldn't necessarily need an Olathe location if people would do what you're saying, just travel from place to place. But, because my Overland Park clinic's large enough to handle the volume for both.
Right.
But
beautiful facility, by the way.
I appreciate that.
That place is amazing.
Yeah, that place has a story of its own as well. So it sort of grew out of necessity, but then became sort of our flagship. It's as of when we built it several years back, I haven't confirmed this statistic lately, was the second largest independent imaging center in the United States.
Wow. That's incredible. So then, so you're going to have overlap, and would you say, is it a 10-minute drive, or do you have like a time frame of the drive max that somebody would actually endure? Sort
of depends on the community that we have the overlap in. For the most part, I think it's a 10 to 15 minute drive, but there are communities like Kansas City, Kansas location that we have, where I would say a good 50, 60% of the people that come to see us there are reliant on the bus lines. So when I looked at that location, and as I look at expanding that office, someday that office will have to change locations because we can't expand within the current building that we're in. So I will make sure that we stay near the bus lines so that people can get to and from us over there. So that each area is demographics are a little different. So the Overland Park one that we just talked about, people will choose to go there. They will drive from where we live out here on 159th Street to that location because that's the location they enjoy based on the way it looks and feels and those kinds of things. But then there are other places where it's not about look and feel. I could put up a bunch of tents and put MRI machines inside of them. As long as it's on the bus line, people would come and use us because that's what's convenient for them.
It's funny how people are just people. And even with our locations, we found out that the 10-minute drive is the max that people are willing to drive, twice a week. So if anybody's listening, maybe a young person who's aspiring to become a CEO, would you mind sharing maybe your timeline of how you got to where you are now?
It takes a lot of time is what I'll say. I'm friends with a few people who are healthcare MBA students right now. So a couple at Pitt State, a couple over at KU. They call for advice or every now and then. In fact, one of them is going to be doing an internship over at my Overland Park office here this summer. So my biggest piece of advice is to understand that it's a journey and it's a long one. You don't graduate and get your MBA and then become CEO.
Right.
So for me, the steps are to understand in healthcare, to understand all the pieces. So I'm a guy who many years ago started out working for a health plan and understanding how the health plan works. And over time, you change roles. I got a management role within that health plan and then eventually moved into private practice where I was managing a physician practice.
I'm sorry, did you attend college?
Yes. Yeah.
What was your degree in?
Business management.
Okay.
So, and frankly, the only way I got that done was to go to school. The first real healthcare job, working for Principal Healthcare, they had tuition reimbursement. And so they helped pay for school for me. Had that not happened, I was not the kind of student that was going to go out and get a scholarship. And if I did get a scholarship, I was not going to be able to maintain the high grade point average that would let me keep it because I did not have that kind of focus. I was just trying to get from point A to point B and, try and get it done kind of thing was what I was looking at.
What was your GPA when you graduated? Do you remember?
I don't. I'm that old now. I actually was going to pull those transcripts for something new I'm doing that I told you about, and I haven't done that yet, so I need to do that.
Another reason why I ask is I think, especially in our area here, we get a little obsessed on the GPA and what grades you're getting, and of course that matters, and it really comes down to are you giving your best effort? And after you graduate, though, that number doesn't really matter anymore. It really comes down to what can you do.
So an interesting sort of side is when people call me looking for CEOs, they never ask me, almost never, ask me where you went to school and what was your grade point average.
Right.
They want to know what I've learned in the last 5 years, not what I learned 25 years ago. So I think the lessons that you learn that are newer become more relevant than what did they teach you out of a textbook 25 years ago,
right?
Which, frankly, at my age, has all changed anyway.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, but you'd ask me, what the steps are. I tell everybody, learn all of it. If you get an opportunity to work for a health plan so you can see how the payer works, then you want to do that if you're going to be in healthcare. Yeah, you want to work everything. Like my staff will tell you, Ed hears that we have a call in at a front desk. He's willing to go work at that front desk that day. You need someone to help answer phones on the call center. He's willing to do that. Understand how to do all of the pieces that make up the organization. Mm-hmm. And that will send you in the path of eventual supervision and management and those sorts of things. But you got to learn it all first. You can't just jump into the spot because you have, a new MBA. I can give you an example of, we had a lady very sharp who was a recent KU MBA and had a statistics background, but not a management background. I hired her with the intent of teaching her the management piece. She was lost for 2-3 years. She knew how to work a spreadsheet, but all that education and training, which was fairly recent, didn't really help her understand how to run a business or how to manage human capital. Mm-hmm. So I really think that they need to be willing to take the steps and time to do it right. Because there's almost nothing I haven't touched in our organization or in the organizations I've worked for in the past. That's why they go, Ed can speak to billing, Ed can speak to how the front desk works, Ed can speak to the call center, all those things, because I worked in the trenches. And I think that's much, much more important than making sure I have some credentials after my name.
Right. There's so many things that I'm thinking about right now from what you just said. First, where does humility come into that? Because you said you got to learn everything, but if you're not a humble person, do you think people are going to want to teach that person about everything?
No, that's true. For me, no task is beneath me. Is the way it's a simple way of putting it. You have to be willing to sweep the floors if that's what's needed. Mm-hmm. You're a business owner, you know that. There are days where you're in here cleaning the windows, but you own the business. You have to be able to show people that's how you lead with that example in mind. That's and I think that you sort of look at biblical teachings, and there wasn't anything that was beneath Jesus.
Right.
And I look at it the same way for myself. I'll do whatever I need to do. And I think others, if they do that, you'll see that the gradual increase in responsibilities happens when you see someone who's willing to do anything. Mm-hmm. Those are the people that you and I want to promote, right?
100%.
You don't want to promote the guy who just graduated college who feels like you owe him a promotion. You want to promote the person that you saw walk through your hallway and he saw some trash on the ground, he picked it up and threw it away. Yep.
I came across, I think it was a founder of a bunch of restaurants, and it was really profound what he said. He said, "You are not allowed to come into any of our restaurants as a staff member unless you have a piece of trash in your hand."
Nice.
Which means you better be looking for trash in the parking lot or a cigarette butt, because if not, then you're not coming in.
That's fantastic.
I love that idea.
I do too. That's fantastic. And they can do it.
Yes. It takes you a couple seconds. The other thing that I was thinking about was the importance of being able to communicate with other people in a way that builds rapport and is filled with compassion. Because going back to your story of the lady that you hired who was a statistician, she didn't really have a lot of that training with interacting with other people, from what it sounds like. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, if you want to become a CEO, it really comes down to, can you interact with people and motivate and coach them to become something greater?
No, I agree with you. If we take this outside of my field and you look at, successful sports teams, mm-hmm. what do they all have in common? A very well-versed coach.
Yep.
Who communicates with people. You're trying to teach people who, interestingly enough, can be more talented than you. But you want them to follow.
Yep.
And you want them to buy into what you're doing. So that's the challenge. I've had the fortune of being able to spend some time watching Bill Self. We used to have a sponsorship with my company did with KU Athletics, and I got to go to the private practices and things. And I'm sitting in the private practices, and he comes up and he talks to us afterwards, and he does sort of like Q&A. And what most people are looking at is like, oh man, look at that guy, he can dribble, and that guy can shoot, and he can dunk. And what I'm watching is something different. I'm seeing Bill Self take these people who are, in terms of playing a physical game, more talented than he ever was. Mm-hmm. But they hang on every word. They do exactly what he tells them to do. And when they don't, he has a way of correcting it that gets it changed, gets them to make the change that he wants. And so I'm watching him teach these, what I'll call young men. And I'm just marveling at the fact that he has such control and such precision over the way in which he influences them. So leadership is, to me, the key for leadership in general is influence. Mm-hmm. It's not how intelligent I am. Mm-hmm. It is not that I have the answers to questions. It is how do I influence the people that work for me in a way that gets our goals met. And that's what Bill Self does well. So watching him was, it was fascinating for me from that perspective. And so I've incorporated some of his ways of doing things.
What was the way that stood out the most?
His superstar players, the way he handled them.
What exactly did you do with them?
Well, I saw there was a couple plays. They're scrimmaging, so they're running, and I can't remember what plays they are anymore. And fast break happens, slows the team, the guard slows the ball down, and they rotate around a couple times. They make a shot, and I think, and from a fan's perspective, like, man, that was great. He blows whistle and stops it, and he says, you know what? And he looks over to the guy that was on the wing that wasn't part of the play, and he says, I need you to be in the right place because this will only work if you are. And I'm thinking to myself, it just worked. And then I'm hearing him. You can sort of hear him explain that the defense, because you're playing against our team, we sort of know our own tendencies, but another defense won't. So they're going to, he said, when Frank, he was talking about Frank Mason, he said, when Frank Mason penetrates, the defense is going to rotate this way. If you're standing over here, you're going to rotate, the defense is not going to rotate where I need them to so we can open up this shot. So he was teaching people away from the play that were not part of the actual play, that their role was important.
Wow. So he basically was making sure that everybody was part of the conversation, even though it wasn't really necessarily about them specifically.
I would say that what he was doing there was saying that every role, whether you are the man with the ball getting ready to take the shot or not, plays an important piece of their team. And that's true of business. So, I have doctors and technicians and IT people, all those things. It takes every single person, even the ones that I don't see every day or that the patients don't ever see, to make it successful. And that's what he was saying. You got to be over here. I know you weren't part of the play, but you cannot just stand and look at the wall. If you're not here, this play doesn't work. So you are, every single thing happening on the court at every single time is important, is what he was saying.
Wow, that's very interesting. So going back to what we were talking about earlier about the timeline. So you were at a health insurance company?
Yeah, it was called Principal Healthcare. They're still in business, based out of Des Moines, Iowa. That was my very first real healthcare job.
What was your position? What was your title?
I started as a customer service rep answering phones.
Good for you.
I was 18.
Wow. So this is during college.
Yeah, that's where I had just graduated high school. I was working at an auto parts store as a parts service manager. And long story short, I ended up because of someone that I met, ended up working for a health plan, which was way outside my box. I had no idea what I was doing. And she just told me it was going to pay more money than I was making before. And so that's why I went. But what I didn't know at the time is that God was pointing me in that direction for a reason. So I've been in healthcare ever since.
Wow. So I have to bring this up. We've known each other for a while now, and we're both, let's just say it, addicted to cars.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could consider the cars your passion.
Yeah.
And think about the two roads that were in front of you. You were working at an auto parts store.
Right.
You could have stayed there and not went into the healthcare industry and quote unquote followed your passion.
Right.
But then you might have been just as successful or reached that that CEO level and maybe a dealership or something like that. I don't know.
Right.
But it just is always fascinating to me, or even just very interesting to me when people say follow your passion, But is it really something that we should take so seriously based on what we enjoy the most?
Yeah, I have this debate frequently with people about enjoyment, and is your profession something you should enjoy or not? It's not a question I can answer. Someone has to answer that for themselves. I would argue that God allowed me to pursue my passion anyway. You're right. I look back on this a lot and wonder what would have happened. As a parts service manager at an auto store, if I had stuck with that, where would I be today? I don't know. That wasn't God's path for me. But what God's path did allow was me to still have that passion and still pursue that, because by moving to healthcare, it allowed me to have a stable financial position that would allow me to purchase and be around and build the cars and still do those things. Now, am I doing it for, was I doing it for a living? As a profession? No. But maybe that's what made me so passionate about it. You have to be careful not to always turn every passion into your profession,
or even a hobby into a passion.
Yeah,
a profession.
Right. So I don't question that anymore. I think that God put me on that path for a reason. That you've heard my stories where I say, is healthcare really where I want to be? And what I've decided is that God has blessed me with certain talents, and those talents allow me to mentor, teach, and lead and influence. And in doing so in healthcare, I'm touching lives every single day, and touching lives in a positive way every single day. Now, I'm not suggesting that we can't do that with cars, because I own an auto shop as well, but we're saving lives.
But you own an auto shop now because you can, because of the
I went into healthcare. Had I not gone into healthcare, that would not be possible.
And this is something maybe to think about too, is whenever we are turning our hobbies into our careers, that hobby may no longer be as enjoyable because now you have to do it.
Right.
A hobby is something you don't have to do, and you only do it when you feel like doing it.
Yeah, by definition, you're right. Now, again, I think you can have a balance between the two, but for me, that wasn't my path. I don't question where God sent you.
Right.
Just do what He asked you to do, and things will tend to work themselves out. So I am blessed in a way where I've got to do all those things. If tomorrow it all came to an end, God has given me a chance to do all the things I dreamed of doing. I mean, every single one of them that I dreamed of doing when I was a young man has been checked off the list. So if that's not a blessing, I don't know what is.
You haven't bought a McLaren yet, though.
I haven't, but for those listening, that's my dream car. However, I have been able to go down to the dealership and drive one.
That's
so
enough,
that is still enough. It's a material thing, and if I'm blessed to have it in some point, so be it. If I'm not, I still have had a chance to sit and drive in it. That was if you jump back to those 18-year-old Ed, I wouldn't have even thought I'd have a chance to sit in one. Yep. I've been able to drive one around. So I think that. I've been blessed still. It may be God's way of saying, Ed, I'm going to let you drive one. This is great like you thought it would be, but do you really need it? Is it really something that you should have right now? And I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that I've gotten to do it. So I'm pleased, and I'm not disappointed in any way.
So leadership is needed everywhere, obviously, and possibly people who are maybe feeling burned out. And I'll be honest with you, there are many, many weeks where I feel burned out on what I'm doing. I mean, I've also had doubts of, I'll be honest, actually, my father said, don't do what I did, because he had his own martial arts studio. He said, don't do that. You need to go get a real job. You need to get a quote unquote white collar job, which was engineering, lawyer, et cetera, et cetera. And there are many days that I just wonder, what if I did take that route? Because I have a degree in marketing, and I could have went down that path, maybe, if anybody hired me. I don't know if anybody would have, just because I would be hard to manage. But I think about that, but then God shakes me, and He pokes me a little and says, stop it. This is what you are supposed to be doing. And it really comes down to, like you said, influence and leadership. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Leadership is leadership. You could have a cleaning company. You still have to lead your team to accomplish the mission and fulfill the objective. it doesn't matter where you are. And I think we get wrapped up into the what are we doing as opposed to who are we influencing.
I agree.
Yeah. So you were at the health insurance answering phones.
Yep.
Basically. And then what was the next step?
I got a promotion within that organization to manage their prescription card services lines. So I went over and I made a move, and it's just basically more phones, but managing it or supervising it,
Sure.
I think is what.
How long were you answering phones in the beginning, though?
About a year before I got the promotion. In a call center environment, and I think this is still true today, I know it is in my organization, there's a lot of performance metrics that can be met and measured. Mm-hmm. And I was always top performer. Yeah.
Did you enjoy doing that?
I look at it today and I say I did. Back then, I remember, that you answer so many calls in a day. You have to do them a certain amount of time. They were scoring things, and back then I was annoyed with it. I'm like, and I just every day someone's scoring how I do. You walk in and out, and each day whether you were just for lay terms, you were an A, B, or C, or D person, kind of thing. And so it was a lot of pressure to do that, but they were doing tuition reimbursement for me, so I was willing to, deal with that pressure because I knew I could also go and do this. Mm-hmm. But because I was a top performer, they were willing to promote me. And so that promotion led to another year in a different department. And then what I found, and this is before I understood God was doing this for me, what I found is that that 2 years, only 2 years experience, was enough to grab the attention on a resume of other healthcare organizations very quickly. And what I found beyond that was I interviewed well. I didn't have any training and background to interview. I was just this young African-American mixed kid going to school trying to figure out what was next. And in interviews, I was doing really well. And so I got lots of opportunities that God put in front of me because he made me someone who was, I guess at the time, probably the only thing I had was that I was well-spoken.
Huh. Where do you think that came from? Talking on the phone so much?
Well, part of it is going to be that. I mean, that's why God puts you in those roles, right? Because he's teaching you something. I think that my father being military, mm-hmm. The folks that we were around from the military were always well put together, sharp people.
Oh, yeah.
There was a guy named Captain Smith who, to me, was... trying to figure out what you've seen what Tom Cruise looks like in the new Top Gun movie. Yep. He's perfectly nice sharp guy, super intelligent. Everybody hangs on his words. Captain Smith was that guy, and so he was. So I tried to emulate some of his behaviors.
So it's kind of a mentor for you.
It was, and Dad had another friend. His name was Garen, who was a police officer in Phoenix. That I also African American guy I used to play basketball with. Well put together, well spoken guy. So I tried to emulate those types of people. And in doing so, I was able to land, job. I would go and I sort of job hopped every couple of years. I'd say, okay, well, it's been 2 years, so I'm going to send my resume out. And that ended up leading me to where I am today, was just working at different healthcare organizations every couple of years. And eventually moving into a role of management and then doing the things I told people. Once you get your first supervisory role, I didn't know what I was doing. Hey, I got a title, but what do you do with it? I just said, you know what, you do everything with it. You sweep the floor, you clean it, you stay late, you open you come in for your patients, anything you need to do. And that eventually got me to where I am. I mean, it's a long, long story, but God has blessed me in so many different ways. And even today, I say, I'm not sure why he chose me, but I am blessed and thankful that he did.
I ask the same question every day. I am not worthy. So just one more question about answering the phones. Did you ever have to deal with complaining people?
Oh, every day. So, that's the difference between answering phones in healthcare and answering phones somewhere else. Usually, when you're calling your health plan or you're calling in to a healthcare organization, something is wrong.
Right.
Now, which one of us gets up in the morning and says, I think I'm going to call over to Diagnostic Imaging Center just to have a conversation?
Just to tell them how good they're doing.
Yeah, this is not like, well, I got a problem with my cell phone, I'm calling AT&T. This is something isn't right, and I have to get a service, an x-ray, whatever it may be. I'm not feeling well. Oh, my
goodness.
And that leads itself to people who are not in the best of moods anyway.
I mean, they're probably anxious to get an MRI because they had a diagnosis or they're dealing with some illness. So, wow, I think that was maybe a powerful time for you to deal with people who are basically on edge all the time. And you're 18 years old.
Yeah.
And I think that probably had a lot to do with you dealing with people later on?
I certainly hope so. I think that I've gotten better and better at it as I've spent more time in the Bible. There's this point in your career, at least for me, and I think there is in most. When you read, there's all kinds of books you can read about leadership. There comes a point where you realize, hey, I might be good at this, but it's usually 20 years into your career. And so, I've come into that place where I said, leadership is where I'm supposed to be, and I'm getting good at it, good enough at it that I can trust my instincts, and I can trust that I can just follow the Lord's teachings, and it will work out. People don't always understand it. They're like, well, what's this steady hand? Things we don't have money to do this, or payroll's tight, all these different things that happen in business. And they look at me and they say, well, aren't you worried? And I say, no. And it's an honest answer. Why? Because I know that I have God looking out for me. And two, I have enough experience now to know that the panic and the fear and the anxiety, if I show it or I run around acting that way, then it's going to sort of be like COVID and contagious to my staff. So I make sure that I keep a steady hand and remember that God's there all the time, and that these things that are happening are just lessons to make us improve. Every single thing that happens in business is an opportunity to improve. Every single thing. So
you mentioned that you visit all 9 of your locations consistently?
Before the pandemic, I would say it was consistently. Now it's probably every other month or so. I bounce to the clinics, and I don't have an agenda when I do. I just go in and say hello and see how people are doing. My questions are usually, how's your kid? Have a good weekend. What's going on? Talk to me. That kind of stuff. I don't go in and add any pressure. At least I don't intend to. And for those listening out here that work at my St. Joe clinic, I know I will do better to get to St. Joe.
Well, St. Joe's a drive. What is it, like an hour?
It's an hour and 15 minutes.
Oh my goodness!
But the drive is time well invested. I'm investing in those folks up there, and even the acquisition of that imaging center, I got to know that team very well, and so I appreciate what they do. I just don't get out there as often as I should.
So it seems that you are more of an operations guy than a sales guy. Would you say that's true?
It depends on the day. I'm a sales guy. Last night I was on phone calls with different investment bankers and things for some stuff we're looking at doing. I was a salesman then. But I spend a lot of time in operations because that's where I'm needed the most.
Mm-hmm. So then how do you naturally think, though? Like for me, I'm naturally an operations guy. I want to make the perfect product, have the perfect service, because then in my head, if it's an exceptional product, people are gonna come and buy it. Right. But then the sales guy would be like, well, how would they know about it? Or the marketing guy, right?
Right. I'd say I'm probably more on the sales side. I used to be more on the operations side. Early in my career, you needed to be in the operations side because you had to understand everything that's going on. Because if you don't grasp how the organization works, I'm not sure how you can lead it.
Yeah.
Now I've become more of the sales guy. What would the patient or customer, because it's not our customers are also the referring physicians that send or order exams from us. How does that experience? What does that look like? How does that experience impact their patients? So I tend to spend a lot of time focusing on that, and that's that convenience piece that we talked about earlier.
What's the hardest lesson that you've learned so far in your professional career?
For the doctors listening, that they're not good at running businesses, that they need people like me or you to run them, and that you need to focus on the health of the organization before you focus on your personal wealth. That is something very difficult for others to grasp that own businesses. If you focus on the health of the organization, the other piece comes. But what tends to happen is there's a conflict with high wage earners that own these organizations, and they tend to focus on their wealth before the health of their organization. If you flip it, it works. If you do it the other way around, you run yourself into a lot of trouble. So that's probably the biggest lesson in private practices that are owned by physicians that I've learned.
Do you read any other books other than the Bible? Is there a business book that stands out for you?
I don't know if well, there's a few things. I read most things that Colin Powell has written. His lessons in leadership as an African American that was one of the most powerful leaders in the entire world are fascinating to me. The way in which he commands his troops and the way in which he commands respect is unique and inspirational to me. from a day-to-day basis, a lot of the Maxwell books, like the 21 Laws of Irrefutable Leadership, that's one I use all the time. Actually, I teach a couple of leadership classes with people that I've hand-selected in my organization that I think could be leaders.
How often do you do that?
We usually do it once a month. During the fourth quarter, we slow down a little bit because we're so busy at the clinics. But in fact, that's what I'm doing after I leave here is I'm going to meet with the leadership development team that I've put together.
How long do those sessions last?
As long as they are needed. So what I usually do is block an hour of time. But if it takes 3, then we'll spend 3. So I block my whole day to just talk and go through it. What's fascinating about Maxwell's writings is that he updates those books periodically to match what's happening in our environment. So you could have read that book 10 years ago. If you read it today, you will see he has changed some of what he's done based on how the market has evolved. So it makes it relevant all the time. So I think that's from a leadership perspective. That's the sort of the way I help teach our folks. So right now, what I'm doing is I have a few young people who, may not be in leadership yet, but have shown some potential for me. And I hand-selected them, which made them a little nervous. These people that can be 4 or 5 levels down, and they heard the CEO wants to meet with them, so it makes them nervous. But the feedback that I'm getting, assuming they're being honest, is that it's been fantastic, that they've had some exposure to me, that they're learning things, they're getting to influence how the organization works. One of the leaders has drafted a new mission statement for us, and that's being rolled out, and so she's very excited about that, and I see a lot of potential for her, in the future. In fact, her goal is to be a CEO, and so, if I can train her to do that, then it's possible that, when I hit the Powerball or whatever it is, that she might be able to step right in.
So what are you looking for, or what caused you to handpick these people? Was there any traits that stood out?
Yeah, a few. Unafraid, people who are willing to share their opinions without fear are people that I think have some leadership qualities. The one that I'm thinking of, although there's a handful of them together, so I don't want to single anyone out, but she has a natural way of getting staff to buy in to the things that she's thinking. She doesn't even recognize that in herself. Mm-hmm. She frequently says to me, "Ed, you have more confidence in me than I do." And what she doesn't see is that others have more confidence in her than she realizes. So she does a really nice job there. So confidence is one of the things that you want. Obviously, you need intelligence, someone who can speak well, and she's those things as well. And she has a skill set where she's actually been a radiology tech, so she understands the patient experience as well as the administrative experience side of it. So I think she just sort of has that nice blend. So I see her as a future leader for our organization or somewhere else. One of the things that I've been told is, hey, you're training these people up to the degree that they're going to be able to leave. They're going to be able to go to another organization. Yeah. But there's no better success story than that, in my opinion.
Yes.
I've bumped into some in the past that I've mentored that are now running companies, and they don't always come right out and say, hey, thanks for helping me do that, but you had some piece of that you helped develop them, and that's a better feeling than almost anything I do on a daily basis, is to know that I help someone or help put someone in a position where they could be successful, where they could do the things that they enjoy.
And I think we all know that that's the most correct approach, the most noblest approach of train them so well that they end up going somewhere else and flourishing. But it's a hard pill to swallow because you put in a lot of time and effort with them, and now you don't get to see the return on your investment.
Well, see, I see it a little differently maybe. That is the return on the investment. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that is what God would have us do. Yep. It's not as important as creating a disciple, but it is important to just trust that the Lord will. You're not doing these things for no reason. Some way, somehow, this is what the Lord wants you to do. And so I just trust in that. Even when I see them working for competitors, we have one who left a few years ago, and she's working for a competitor, and every now and then she'll text me and say, let's have lunch. And she sort of wants to do it like we're CIA hiding in the corner. It's highly secret. She's afraid they'll know. And she'll ask for my advice, and I think that carries a lot of weight with me, that she went to the competitor, she's managing over there, but she still trusts me and comes to me for advice. So, I mean, that is the payback right there. When I sit in the lunch and I say, she's taking what she learned and she's using it, competing with me every day, but we still trust each other and respect each other. I think that's bigger than the two organizations.
So we were called to be productive, and I firmly see that in the Bible. And I think a lot of people today struggle with being productive on a consistent basis. I always say it's easy to be an all-star for a day or maybe even a week, but can you be an all-star for years and just consistently be at that high productivity level over the long term? Is there like a life hack that you do that kind of kicks you into that mode, or that helps you get over those times that you feel like you don't want to be productive?
I'm not sure I say I have a life hack. What I do is I have a routine that I force myself into. I get up by a certain time, make sure I'm dressed at a certain time. If you were to ask the people in my household, they'll say he's never late for anything. He's early for everything. That's because I force myself to be. We all get days where we don't want to get out of bed. Yeah. We all have days where we wonder if what we're doing matters, and so we're a little bit slower and we just don't want to do it. I try to make sure I keep myself on a regimented schedule for that reason. That there is no excuse for me not being on time. There is no excuse for me not getting up and doing the normal daily tasks that I'm supposed to do, no matter what's going on. So I do it to my detriment at times. I will be very sick, and I'm still up on time, and I'm still communicating with people and doing the things that I normally do. So that's my way of doing it. To stay productive is to stay, for me personally, is to stay on schedule.
You think that came from your father?
Oh, absolutely. He was the military guy who, when his son came, it's funny because I look at my sons now, and when I ask them to come home, if they're 10, 15 minutes late, that's good. I'm comfortable. They're finally home. If I was 3 minutes late, I'd get the car keys taken away. So it was ingrained in me at an early age, and now I use it as a way to keep myself moving and motivated. You're a little bit like me. If you're going to be moving, you might as well be productive.
Yeah.
Right. So get myself out of bed, do those things, and no matter what happens. So one of the things that I struggle with personally is I see people have some difficulty in their life, whatever that may be. We're all going to bump into those things. They allow those difficulties to cause them to shut down and not be productive in any way. And that can cost them a lot of different things, cost them relationships, cost them jobs, whatever it may be. I try to make sure no matter what happens to me or what obstacle I'm given, that I don't let that interrupt that routine I just told you about.
Almost like you have to just, no matter what, stay professional.
Right. Well, you have to push through things. I mean, this is not, you read the Bible and you can tell that everybody there had it harder than we do. I don't think there's an exception to that.
No.
But we don't remember that. No. So I try to remember that there are a lot of people that have it harder than I do, and there are a lot worse things than what I do. And I get up in the morning and I've got, there's problems with my family, or there's problems with but I also know people who lost loved ones last week, and that's no exaggeration. So, it can be a lot worse. Push through it, get things done, stay productive, and that's what I do. I mean, that's my hack, is keep yourself on a regimented schedule and you'll be fine. Even I make sure I don't sleep. There are a few exceptions, like if I go on vacation or something, but I make sure I don't sleep more than 6 hours a day. I mean, I just don't do it. Yeah, I go to bed at 12:30 and I'm up within 6 hours, just because that's what keeps my mind fresh and young and going.
So 6 hours is your perfect number?
Is my perfect number.
Wow.
I usually do a little less during high stress times, but for the most part, 6 hours is.
So what happens if you get 8?
I feel a little bit sluggish, and it takes me longer to get moving and stay in and get myself into my routine. There
are people out there. I mean, it's an extremely small percentage that can get like 4, and they're fine.
Yeah,
I'm so jealous.
I've been able to do that myself. I can do it for 3 weeks, but beyond that, I have to get that 6.
But they're biologically wired for that, which is, they just won the lottery in life.
Yeah, some of the most successful people in the world are wired that way.
Yeah. So as we wrap this up, my final question for you is, how has God used diagnostic imaging to further his kingdom?
I think it's about the we're in healthcare. If we focus on the word care, we care for the people that we see. And God wants us to care about people and to treat them well and to help heal them. And that's part of what we're doing. I mean, if you think about a lot of the missions Jesus sent his disciples on, they were healing people. And so that's what we are. We're healers. That's where the word health comes from. So I always focus on that because, in my role, you get tied up in the, in the minutia, the money and its salaries and, and how much bigger can the organization get? How many more patients can we see? As long as I'm seeing one a day and caring for someone, I think that's how God furthers the mission. That is actually how I answer the question when people say, are you doing the Lord's work? I say, I think so, because that's why God sent me into healthcare, so that I can make sure that these patients that are coming to see us are healed. And so
Excellent.
That's part of the healing process.
Well, I know that you just love doing these video interviews. So I just want to tell you how grateful I am that you decided to join me today. I really appreciate it. And I have to also say thank you for having your son here at Coma for 5 years now, maybe 6.
He was 3. That's been 5 years because he's 8 now.
And he's a black belt now.
He's a black belt.
I mean, he's awesome, but thank you from the bottom of my heart for choosing us and for doing this.
No, thank you so much for inviting me. I should say that, we spent a lot of time talking about business and things that I greatly appreciate your friendship. God brought us together. Mm-hmm. You helped me with Levi. Levi was struggling with some things when he started here. And now he being a black belt with you is part of his identity. I mean, you talk about sales, he's out telling everybody. There are 4 or 5 kids in his school that come here now, and they all look up to him because he's a black belt and they are not. And so it's been a really interesting journey, one that I'm so thankful for, and thankful for our friendship, and appreciate all that your staff has done for us. You have great folks that have helped teach Levi, mentor him through good and bad times. I mean, he's a kid, so he struggles at times. And so you guys have been great to him, so thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, he has a job waiting for him as soon as he's 14 years old.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because he said that he wants to have a building like yours, and he wants to teach. So if you ever get to ask him about it, that's something he talks about.
I'll be waiting.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.